This video comes in response to a request by this viewer who asked, would you consider making a video outlining a study approach or progression for learners to study Spanish phonetics and phonology in a comprehensive and effective way? I thought that was a great suggestion, and I promised to prioritize making a video on that topic. This is that video. In today's video, I'll describe a sequence or progression for studying Spanish sounds, so learners can make sure that they cover everything and don't leave anything out. Unlike the English language, the Spanish language is written pretty phonemically. This means that most Spanish letters represent one phoneme, and most Spanish phonemes are represented by one letter, and the exceptions are relatively few and easy to remember. A wonderful consequence of this fact for Spanish learners is that the Spanish alphabet itself can be used as an aid in understanding, learning, and remembering Spanish pronunciation. So let's go through the Spanish alphabet and see how it can be used to help categorize Spanish sounds. I'm going to use the older formulation of the Spanish alphabet in which CH and double L were considered independent letters, because it even better represents the inventory of Spanish phonemes. Obviously, I can't go into detail about each of the topics I'm about to mention in this video, or it would end up being hours long. But I do have a video on each of these topics on my channel, organized into relevant playlists, and I'm in the process of remaking and updating all of my older videos. So don't panic if I don't go into much detail on each of these topics here. I go into plenty of detail in my individual videos. Step 1. Make sure you know all the Spanish phonemes. Okay, we start with A, which is a vowel, and with that we create the category of vowels, and vowels may be studied individually as monophthongs, or as diphthongs, triphthongs, or hiatuses. The next letter is B, which is pronounced exactly the same way as V and is a voiced stop. The voiced stops include BV, D, and G, and they all follow similar rules of pronunciation. Namely that they're pronounced as approximants or fricatives in most phonetic contexts, and are only pronounced as stops in limited contexts, so it's very useful to study them together as a category. The next letter is C, which in its hard pronunciation is the K phoneme. K is a voiceless stop. The voiceless stops include P, T, and K, and they all follow a similar principle in how their pronunciation in Spanish differs from their pronunciation in English, namely that they're pronounced less explosively and without an accompanying puff of air. To this category I like to add CH, because it's also pronounced less explosively than its English counterpart. The next letter is F, which is pronounced the same in Spanish as in English. The next letter is H, which is silent, which means that it doesn't represent any Spanish phoneme. The next letter is J, which together with the soft pronunciation of G represent the voiceless velar fricative phoneme. Like hard C, the letter K represents the K phoneme. The letter K only appears infrequently in Spanish, mainly in words borrowed from other languages. Since we're forming categories, W also appears infrequently and really only in proper nouns and words recently borrowed from other languages. It represents the sound made by Spanish U before another vowel in a diphthong, but not an individual Spanish phoneme. The letter L represents the L phoneme, which is slightly different in pronunciation from its English equivalent in that it's pronounced with a higher, brighter, and less rounded sound. In about 90% of Spanish dialects, double L and Y represent a single sound. The specifics of that sound vary from dialect to dialect around the Spanish-speaking world, with the voiced palatal fricative phoneme being one of the more common. In about 10% of dialects, double L represents a different sound that I call Elye. M, N, and Nye represent the nasal consonants. M and N are extremely similar to their English counterparts, while Nye has no exact counterpart in the English language. Q is only found in combination with U, and like hard C, represents the K phoneme. In the QU combination, the U is silent. Depending on where it falls in a word, Spanish R can appear either as single R or double R, and depending on phonetic context and spelling, may be pronounced either as a tap or trill. Spanish S represents the S phoneme, which in Latin America is pronounced much like American English S, but has an apical pronunciation in northern Spain. S also has a pattern of reduction that varies from region to region around the Spanish-speaking world. The letter X does not represent a single phoneme in Spanish. It represents K and S together. In certain phonetic contexts, in many dialects, the K is reduced and X is just pronounced as S. In Latin American Spanish, Z and soft C represent the same phoneme as S. In the Spanish of Spain, Z and soft C represent the phoneme theta that is pronounced like the English voiceless TH. So this is the Spanish alphabet and all the phonemes that may be represented by each letter. Now, this isn't quite the most efficient way to approach the Spanish phonemes, and someone who wanted to write a book on phonetics and phonology wouldn't organize it this way. But it's a very effective way for a student of Spanish to remember all the Spanish phonemes because it's based on the alphabet, which is something we all know by heart and is therefore a reference we carry around with us in our head. A slightly more efficient presentation of the Spanish phonemes, in the order I presented them in this video, would look more like this. And here are the same phonemes the way they'd be organized in a phonetics and phonology text. But I still think the best way for students to remember them is associated with the alphabet, like this. Step 2. Learn Spanish rules of phonology. It's important to understand that some sounds have more than one pronunciation. Whether you pronounce one version of a sound or another depends on the other sounds that surround it in a word or phrase, and there are fixed and regular rules that describe when to pronounce each of the different versions of a sound. The system of rules that tells you when to produce each version of a sound is what's known as phonology, and in order to pronounce Spanish correctly and accurately, you must not only learn to pronounce individual Spanish sounds and even whole words correctly, but you must internalize the rules of Spanish phonology so that you produce the correct version of each sound depending on its phonetic context. Fortunately, standard Spanish phonology is quite simple. About 3/4 of Spanish sounds have only one standard pronunciation, with no variations at all to worry about. And of the 7 Spanish sounds that do have variations, 5 have only 2, and the rules that describe when to produce each are easy to learn. You can actually detail all of the phonological rules of standard Spanish in a single, very simple chart. In my videos on Spanish pronunciation, I always discuss the different versions of a sound and give an accurate rule for when to produce each version. In other words, my videos teach both phonetics and phonology. Step 3. Sound combinations. Now, in theory, if you've done a perfect job with steps 1 and 2, you shouldn't need anything else in the way of study. You should be able to derive all the correct pronunciations of any combination of sounds from the rules of phonology. In theory. But of course, we're only human, and in practice things are more complicated than that. In practice, most of us find that once we begin combining sounds into words and phrases, we have 2 difficulties. Although our mouth may be capable of articulating sounds accurately in isolation, once we begin combining them into words and phrases, we discover combinations of sounds that are difficult for us to articulate. These combinations may require drilling and practice, and they may even require you to go back and make sure that you're articulating each of the individual sounds in the combination correctly and applying the correct phonological rule. The rules of phonology in your native language are different from those of Spanish. This means that the sound combinations are assembled differently. Once you begin combining Spanish sounds into words and phrases, you're likely to do so using the phonological rules of your native language, which would cause major mispronunciations in your Spanish. If you want your Spanish pronunciation to be accurate, it's absolutely critical that you identify any sound combinations that you produce with the phonology of your native language and learn to pronounce them with the phonological rules of Spanish. Step 4. English-Spanish contrasts. One of the best ways to assure that you're applying Spanish phonological rules correctly and not unknowingly applying the rules of your native language is to also study the phonology of your native language and then consciously compare and contrast the 2 phonological systems. Since I'm a native English speaker, I call this area of study English-Spanish contrasts. I've just barely begun to explore this approach on this channel. While all of my videos compare and contrast Spanish and English, so far I only have one video that exclusively uses this approach. And that's my video on English Yod coalescence. But I anticipate making many more English-Spanish contrast videos in the future. Alright, a few closing thoughts and we'll wrap this up. For listening exercises, YouTube videos and podcasts directed toward language learners, dubbed movies, and Spanish language audiobooks provide excellent sources of accurate pronunciation. I recommend that second language learners at all levels of skill engage in listening activities, listening for all the features they've learned about in their studies of phonetics and phonology. At this stage in my progress, I enjoy listening to Spanish language audiobooks. I recently finished this one, which is narrated in Latin American Spanish, and began listening to this one, which is narrated in the Spanish of north-central Spain. And even after all these years, I still hear little nuances I may not have been fully aware of, and I learn something new or maybe relearn something I'd forgotten. This is especially true for me when I listen to books narrated in the Spanish of Spain, since I'm more familiar with the Spanish of Latin America. I picked up one tidbit in the speech of one of the narrators of this book that I wrote down and may include in one of my future videos on this channel, and I've picked up several interesting things in the speech of the narrator of this book. In my opinion, the single best method for practicing pronunciation skills is reading out loud. I feel that reading is much better than impromptu, spontaneous speaking, because when you're reading, you don't have to worry about remembering vocabulary words and assembling them into grammatically accurate sentences. All you have to do is pronounce the words on the page. This is potentially an even more effective learning exercise in Spanish than in other languages, since Spanish writing is more nearly phonemic. When reading out loud, as opposed to speaking, you can more easily monitor your pronunciation, look for sounds you don't yet pronounce accurately, and pay attention to sound combinations you don't articulate smoothly. I recommend that second language learners at all levels of skill practice reading aloud. I've read several books aloud in Spanish each year for the past 20 years or so. These are the last 2 books I read aloud. I consider these 4 steps to be necessary fundamentals for studying Spanish pronunciation in a comprehensive and effective way. But they're certainly not everything you could do, and they're not sufficient for developing the best pronunciation possible. To reach their maximum potential, Spanish students will also require immersion in a Spanish-speaking culture, where they speak Spanish all day, every day with native speakers. As I've said in a previous video, I believe that maybe 85% of your progress in learning Spanish pronunciation can be achieved without immersion, but it's very interesting how big of an apparent improvement occurs with that last 15%. Alright, if you've learned something from this video, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. If you have any questions about the Spanish language, please ask in the comments. I keep a running list of viewers' requests that I consult when deciding what topic to cover next.